You know, this season is a great season to get back into the routine of things. I know there's many of you who are wrapping up all of your summer plans, vacations are over, and now it's time to jump back into life and the routines of life. And one of the ways that we want to help you do that is to jump back into your routine of being part of Harvester Christian Church's family by offering you an opportunity, if you've never been in one before, or you're not in one right now, to get into a group at Harvester Christian Church. There's some of you who maybe you take the summer off and your groups are getting ready to launch back this fall. I'm excited for you to jump back into those routines of relationship. But I also know there's many of you who are not currently in a group at Harvester Christian Church, or you've never been in a group because you're fairly new to Harvester. Can I tell you this? If this is all you do at Harvester, you're missing out on the best part of being part of Harvester Christian Church. And it's getting to know people. It's doing life together and not just going to church, but being a part of a church and being in a family of church. Starting next Tuesday on I don't even know what season it is. August the 22nd, we have a program that we're launching. It's 6 weeks. It's called Connection Space. And it's designed to help you find a place to connect if you're not already connected. Now, if you're in a group or you have something you're part of, this isn't for you. But if you're like, I need to get into a group, I want to get to know people at Harvester, this is a great spot to test the waters on that. What it's designed to do is introduce what groups are at Harvester and possibly give you some people who you connect with and you're like, hey, let's get together and let's form a group and let's try to travel through this life together. I hope that you'll check that out. It's on Tuesdays for 6 weeks, and it happens in the Landing at our St. Charles campus. If you're not part of a group, I hope you'll jump into one. Here's the reality though. Life is distracting, and for some of you, the reason you need that is because life's distractions have come in and you've not been in community for a while. Kids grow up, you move, relationships change, and distractions come in and they begin to ruin community. And that's kind of what I want to talk about today, is that there is a distracting devil who comes in to ruin our relationships. And what ends up happening with distractions is we end up fighting against what we should be fighting for. That's what distractions do. They take our energy, they take our attention, they take our efforts away from the things that are most important, and we eventually allow things that are most important to fall by the wayside. Here's the thing that I've seen happen in relationship after relationship, that most relationships don't experience ruin because of one thing. Typically what happens is that relationships die a death by 1,000 paper cuts. Have you seen that to be true in some of the relationships that have come in and out of your life? That it's just one cut after another cut after another cut after another cut, or a distraction after distraction after distraction. And eventually this thing that was amazing, this thing that was a priority, eventually you look at it and you're like, what happened to it? It seems to have fallen apart. What I want to do is look at Genesis chapter 3, because this has been a tactic that Satan has used for hundreds of years. So grab your Bibles, open up to Genesis chapter 3. What we're doing in this series called The Thing Between Us is we're looking at these things that get between us in relationship. And here's what I'm discovering is that this is very uncomfortable for you to listen to as you sit there next to the people you're in relationship with. So sorry, but I'm not really sorry, because we need to deal with that thing that's between us, that sometimes we ignore or we pretend that's not there, because that thing that's between us is the devil trying to come between us and ruin this relationship. And so we need to look at these things. And so in Genesis chapter 3, we get to see what tactics the devil uses to bring ruin to relationship. Last week, we saw that he brings dismissiveness into relationships, where he dismisses someone in the relationship, or we learn to dismiss one another, we learn to dismiss God. Today, what he does is he builds on that dismissiveness with distraction. God, he places Adam and Eve together in relationship in this garden, and Satan gets their eyes off of God. That's what we saw last week. He tells them, I know God said this, but here's the truth. Don't listen to God, listen to me. And then what he does is he turns their eyes away from God, and he begins to grow their appetite for something else in the garden. Verse 6, it says this. It says, when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was a delight to the eyes, and that the tree was to be desired to make one wise, she took of its fruit and ate. And she also gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate. Side note here, that's an important line to me, that her husband was with her and he ate. It wasn't just Eve who was dealing with this, but Adam was right next to her the whole time. But what we see here is that Satan redirects Adam's eyes and Eve's eyes away from God by showing them something else in the garden and growing their appetite for that. He says, I know that you have this great relationship with God, but should you really listen to him? Directs their eyes away. And look at this beautiful thing. Look at this tree. Look at this amazing thing. Essentially what Satan does in relationships is he brings in these distractions to increase your appetite for something less. And that's what distractions do. Here's what I hope you'll do during this message and really during this series, is that I hope that you'll identify the most important relationships in your life. You've got a lot of relationships, but what are those primary relationships in your life? Is it your spouse? If you have a spouse, I hope that's up there, by the way. Is it your relationship with your kids? Or is it your relationship with your parents? Is it your relationship with your coworkers or your team? Is it relationship with your friends or your roommates? Who is that relationship? And then I want to ask you during this specific message is, what kind of distractions are in that relationship? Because essentially what will happen is Satan will distract you and turn your eyes onto lesser things, and he'll grow your appetite for that, hoping that your appetite for that person, that relationship, will dwindle. That's exactly what he does here in this verse here, Genesis chapter 3, verse 6. There's three things specifically that Satan grows Adam and Eve's appetite for. And the first one is he grows their physical appetite. When you look at this verse, you see that the woman saw that the tree was what? Good for food. Essentially what Satan is doing, he's like, look at this tree. Doesn't this food look delicious? Doesn't your physical appetite just yearn for this kind of food? I know you've got all these other foods in the garden, but what about this one? You've tasted of that tree, you've tasted of that tree, but have you tasted this tree? And what eventually begins to happen is, it says that this tree began to look good for food. Her physical appetite began to grow. She was essentially saying, I want that instead. I think in our relationships, one of the things that distracts us is our physical appetite for other kinds of foods. Maybe we're distracted by this incessant need to fill our bellies with pleasure. Or we're distracted by this physical appetite for sex. Or you're distracted by a physical appetite for pornography or for alcohol or for food. And these things, these are what's drawing your attention more so than the person you're in a relationship with. And you would rather have food from that tree than food from the tree that God has given you. Or maybe it's something like fitness. You look at your body and you're like, I want to feed my physical appetite. This is what I want all of my attention to go towards is feeding this fitness or feeding this image of myself. One of the distractions that Satan will use is this physical appetite, these physical distractions that will distract from our core relationships. But it's not just the physical appetite, there's also this emotional appetite that we see as well. They look at the tree and it says that it's a delight to the eyes. This word in the Hebrew, this word delight, it's not just it looks good, but it's this sense of there's this deep yearning for. That when I look at this thing, there's something inside me, deeper than my belly, deeper than my hunger. It's in my heart and it yearns for this. I look at this and it just makes me feel something else. It makes me feel more. And I think there's a lot of times that in our relationships, our eyes are turned off of the relationships to other things that make us feel what this relationship is not making me feel. I've seen people be distracted by coworkers out of their relationship. Like, well, this coworker, they just make me laugh in a way that my spouse doesn't make me laugh. Or when I'm around this person in the neighborhood, my heart is just drawn more towards them. I've seen other people escape through this emotional appetite of like fantasy worlds. I'm gonna dive into this book because this book takes me to this world that just distracts me from the world I'm living in. Or this video game and the community of people that I'm surrounded by in this game, they seem to get me in more so than the people that are around me. Or a TV, we like to turn on TV or flip through TikTok videos or Instagram reels because they make us feel something. Can I tell you that that's one of my distractions is when I've gone through a tough day and I'm just drained. Often what I'll do is I'll just scroll through videos that make me laugh. I save comedy videos and office clips and Parks and Rec clips just so I can come back to them. So on those days when I don't feel anything, I can just scroll through and just laugh all by myself. And I forget that I've got people around me that I should be going to for that kind of emotional appetite. Satan comes in and he distracts us and he says, well, what about this? This will make you feel in a way that relationship that's really important to you won't make you feel. He distracts us with a physical, emotional appetite, but also he distracts Adam and Eve with an intellectual appetite. He increases that intellectual appetite. He says, this particular piece of fruit, it won't just make you feel a certain way, but it also make you wiser. I think one of the things that gets into relationships to distract us is pursuits and intellectual pursuits of we figured someone out, and so that's not a joy anymore. So now we've got to go to someone else so that we can figure them out and understand them more. Or I've got this career that is just really more interesting to me than the people around me, and so I'm going to chase after a career. Or maybe you've got this intellectual pursuit of like debating and defending where you spend all of your time debating and defending things that other people have said to the point of you're not even listening to the people who love you and are encouraging you. You just keep going back to those things. Well, I wish I would have said this today. I wish I could have done that. And it's this intellectual pursuit, this drive of the brain that just distracts us from the relationships that are around us. Now, I'll tell you this, not all distractions are bad. One of the things that we see in Genesis chapter 3 is that God left Adam and Eve in a place that was labeled good. But the cunningness of Satan is that he comes into this place of good and he distracts them from what matters most. And I think that's what distractions do. Anytime something good distracts you from what matters most, the good things can become dangerous things. And church, I want to tell you this, good things can become dangerous things. People are not bad things, but when they distract you and take you out of the most important relationships, books and TVs and videos and laughing, they're not bad things. But when they take you out of moments where you could be focusing on what's most important, those things come between us and they become incredibly dangerous. Satan will increase your appetite for lesser things so that he can destroy the most important things in your life. And I think we, like Adam and Eve, are really good at trading our greatest joys for momentary distractions. The problem here is that this distraction caused Adam and Eve to forget something incredibly important. Satan's like, look how good this is for food. Look how this makes you feel. This can make you wise. And they forgot something else. That God said, this will kill you. This will bring death to your relationship. And just a few verses later, we find out that it did. And can I tell you this? It's no different in our relationships. Our relationships often die a death of 1,000 distractions. So how do we deal with distractions in our life? What I want to do today is I just want to share 4 ways that you can deal with distractions and look at some New Testament passages here, specifically in the life of Jesus, that he dealt with these distractions. And what I'm hoping is, number one, that if you sense that this might be a message for you, or if the person next to you is elbowing you, that this message is for you, that maybe you'll take a few notes on this. Write these things down. I'm gonna give you some conversations that you can have together with someone who is an important relationship with you, that maybe you're a little distracted in that relationship. Here's the first thing you need to do if you're gonna deal with distractions, is you need to know your direction. Know your direction. You understand this, right? That no relation survives on autopilot. That's our assumption, is that once a relationship starts, that it'll just go on its own and it'll go towards a good direction. It'll move towards a healthy direction on its own. You know that's not true, right? You've been in a relationship that you've put on autopilot, and you've gotten a distance in that relationship and realized that you're at a place that you didn't realize this relationship was gonna go. What we need to do right off the bat is know the direction of our relationships. And so, who is that primary priority relationship in your life? Is it a spouse? Is it a child? Is it a friend? And then you need to answer this question about that relationship. What do I desire for this relationship? Can I ask you married people this question? What do you desire for your relationship this year? Maybe just in the next 12 months. What do you desire for that? Have you even asked that question with one another? Of where is this relationship going? Is the goal just to be married another day? Is that the goal? Hopefully it's more than that. Your friendships, what's your hope for your friendship? Is the friendship to be friends another day? Or is there more that you desire for that friendship? I'll tell you this, if you don't know where you're going, it's easy to get distracted. It's easy to get distracted from your relationship when you don't know where this relationship is going. Jesus understood this in Matthew chapter 4. We see an interesting passage here that really relates to what happens in the Garden of Eden in Genesis chapter 3. And in Matthew chapter 4, Jesus, he was just baptized, and he was told that by God in the witness of the crowd that this is my son in whom I love and with whom I'm well pleased. God affirmed a relationship in that moment in Jesus' baptism. And then the very next thing that happens is what? Jesus is led into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. That's the very next thing that happened. A relationship is affirmed, and then a temptation comes next. And in this desert, Jesus is fasting for 40 days. Needless to say, his physical appetite is there. Jesus, in this moment, is hungry. And in the midst of this appetite, this is where that snake slithers in and begins to have a conversation with Jesus. It says this, it says, the tempter came and said to Jesus, if you are the Son of God, command these stones to become loaves of bread. Do you see what Satan is doing here? He's using the exact same tactic that he used on Adam and Eve. Jesus, take a look at this tree. You can have this food. Doesn't it look good? Doesn't it raise your appetite for food? He was using the same tactics, but the difference here is that Jesus knew what he was after. Jesus was hungry for something else. Jesus was more hungry for somebody else. And so Jesus responds this way. It is written, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God. He says, Satan, I hear you, but I hunger for something more. Can I tell you, I wish Adam and Eve would have responded that way. Satan, I see that tree. It looks good for food. It looks desirable, but we hunger for something more. We are sons and daughters of God, and that relationship, that's what we're after. Now, is bread bad? No, but Jesus knew what was better. Jesus knew the direction of his relationship. Jesus knew that he was going to put his eyes and his heart and his physical appetite and his emotional appetite and his intellectual appetite towards God, and that's where he was going. Can I ask you this question? Where is your relationships going? Where are they going? When you know where to go and where you're going, that's when you can say no to the distractions that keep you from getting there. Know your direction. Secondly, you also need to not just know your directions, but you need to know your distractions. I think most of you in this room are pretty self-aware. You're self-aware enough to know, here's what distracts me. Like if Satan were to sneak up into my relationship and start to distract me from the most important people in my life, here's what he would use. Can you pinpoint those in your own life? Like how has he used things in your life to distract you from people that were close to you? And maybe you just need to do an inventory of some physical emotional, and intellectual distractions that Satan uses in your life. I love that God, he points out what the distractions would be for Adam and Eve. He says, these trees, good, eat them, enjoy them, have them. This tree, distraction, stay away from it. He pinpoints it. And I think one of the things that we need to do is we need to pinpoint those distractions in our life. You need to know what they are, maybe even write them down, and maybe even share it with the person that you're in a relationship with and let them know, here's the things that distract me. And if you want to be really brave, here's something else you can do. Sit down with that person at a table, coffee table, sit down for lunch, and ask them this question. What do you think distracts me from you? That's a hard question to ask somebody. What do you think distracts me from you? You've seen me. You've seen me distracted. There's times where you've felt like I was bringing ruin into our relationship via distractions. Would you be willing to point out those distractions to me? Pinpoint those distractions, know what they are. Here's something else that I've had to do. Is also not just pinpoint what the distractions are, but pinpoint what's not a distraction in my life. Pinpoint what's not a distraction. Here's what I mean by this. Here's what I've realized, is that there are some things in life that in the moment I feel like they're distractions, but they're actually my priority. You know what I'm talking about? There's been times where I've been at home working hard on something, and I've got this little guy in my home who's like, his favorite phrase is, Dad, watch this. Anybody else feel that? Like, Dad, watch this. Dad, watch this. And it's never anything great. It's never anything, like he fooled me the first 2 times. I'm like, oh, this is gonna be great. And it's just like, I'm like, son, everybody can do that. But Dad, watch this. There's moments in my life where I feel like something is distracting me. And so what I need to do is I need to pinpoint that there are some things that feel like a distraction that are actually not a distraction, and they are my primary relationship. Like I need to realize that when my son or my kids want my time, they're not a distraction from something that's important. That maybe this thing that I think is important is actually turned into a distraction to what's most important. That when I'm in the midst of watching a show and I'm near the end of it, gonna find out who the killer is, and my wife wants to talk about the day, that she's not a distraction, that this TV show is distracting me from what's most important. Or that when I'm in the office and I'm pounding away at a message and a coworker comes in knocking on the door, that maybe they're not the distraction, but maybe they're the priority. We need to pinpoint out not just what the distractions are, but also what the distractions are not. Know what your distractions are. If you're gonna know your direction and know your distractions, it's not just enough to know it, but you also have to do something about it. 2 things to do. First one is this: be intentional. Once you know where your relationships are going, what you desire for your relationships, you know what the distractions are, now you need to be intentional about what you do with those distractions and what you do with those relationships. Here's the reality. You can't stop distractions from coming. Anybody know that to be true? You cannot stop distractions from coming. They're gonna come at all times of the day, in all contexts, in all relationships. You can't stop them, but you can prepare for them. You can prepare and protect your relationships from them. Just one easy practical thing to do. Calendar undistracted time for your most important relationships. Calendar undistracted times for your most important relationships. This is something that I had to do at the beginning of this year. At the beginning of this year, my wife and I put together a rule of life of this is the most things important in our life and the things that we are going to focus our attention on. And one of the things that I had to do is I had to calendar in my rule of life time that I was gonna spend with the most important people in my life. Otherwise, I would know that all the distractions of life would take over from the most important things in life. And so one of the things that we did this year is we reinstated in our marriage our date day. Distractions had come in and gotten us off track with that. And it had been a long time since we had just time alone, just me and my wife. And so we've calendared that every Friday at lunchtime, that's gonna be undistracted time, where it's just us together, sitting across from a table with one another, talking about life, talking about faith, talking about friendships, talking about future. And it's on the calendar so that we're intentional about it. But the older I get, the more I'm realizing that there's other more important relationships. And so I've had to do that with my kids now. It used to come naturally when my kids were younger. They needed a lot of things. But the older they get, I'm beginning to realize that they don't need as much from me anymore. And so if we're gonna have an intentional relationship, I'm gonna have to be the one who goes to them. And so I've had to make sure that I schedule coffee dates with my oldest daughter. I've had to make sure that I spend undistracted times with my middle daughter. She's 15 and getting her license. And so we're out on the streets of St. Charles right now learning how to drive. I'm so sorry, guys. I'm so sorry. But it's great father-daughter time in that car with a lot of distractions around us, trying to spend undistracted time together. I've had to make sure that I'm going outside even after a long day of work and throwing the ball with my son. Because for him, when we're throwing a ball, that's when he opens up. That's when we can have that undistracted time just one-on-one. I've also realized this as a man, that I'm not gonna focus on friendships as a man unless I calendar undistracted time for friendships. My wife, that comes naturally for her. But for me, it does not. And so this year I'm like, I've gotta make sure that I'm spending time with people who I would consider a friend. If we're gonna have relationships that are undistracted, we have to be intentional about those. And I hope that you'll sit down after this message sometime during this week, pinpoint those relationships, and then calendar undistracted time for them. You've got to be intentional about it. But not just be intentional. In the midst of that intentionality, when you are in that undistracted time, here's what you also need to do. Be in the moment. Can I tell you this? It's one thing to calendar the moment. It's another thing to be in that moment when you are in that moment. It is really easy to have that time with your wife and then to pull out your phone and check the news. It is really easy to schedule time with your child and in the midst of that, be thinking about work and thinking about everything else. It's really easy to go out with a friend and never really be intentional about being in that moment and asking them questions about their life. We have to be in the moment. And this is what I love about Jesus, is that Jesus seemed to be always in the moment with the people that he was around. And can I tell you this? Jesus knows all about distractions. Satan didn't just pop up one time to tempt Jesus. Throughout his entire ministry, Satan is trying to bring distraction after distraction into Jesus' life to get Jesus to miss the moment. But Jesus was intentional to stay in the moment. There's this great story in Luke chapter 8 that I want to wrap up with. Luke chapter 8, verse 42 to 48. We see Jesus, he's in this ministry, his ministry's full swing, and there's this guy that comes up to Jesus and tells him that he's got this daughter that's sick and he needs Jesus to come to his house to heal his daughter. And so Jesus, he's in the midst of this crowd, but he begins to walk towards this man's house and this crowd begins to follow him. And it's a large crowd. This crowd is pressing in on him, but Jesus walks anyway. And it says this in verse 42. It says, Jesus went and the people pressed around him. And when it says pressed here, get the idea of crushed around him. The reason they were crushing around him is because every single person in that crowd wanted something from Jesus. They needed something from Jesus. There were a lot of distractions to where Jesus was going, but he begins to march forward anyway. Verse 43, it talks about one of these people who was around Jesus. It says this, there was a woman who had a discharge of blood for 12 years. And though she had spent all of her living on physicians, she could not be healed by anyone. So she came up behind Jesus and touched the fringe of his garment. Now, I find it interesting, this woman's strategy for coming to Jesus. She wasn't just gonna push in and yell and scream, but rather she just wanted to sneak up behind. She didn't wanna bother him. She didn't wanna distract him from what he was doing. She just wanted to Just get a moment where she could touch his robe, and maybe that would heal her. Maybe she would be healed just by being in his presence, even though he didn't know that she was there. And it says that when she touched the fringe of his garment, immediately her discharge of blood ceased. She was healed in that moment. Her hope was that she would be able to go home and Jesus would go forward with what he was doing, but Jesus stopped everything. Verse 45, it says, Jesus said, "Who was it that touched me?" When all denied it, Peter said, "Master, the crowds surround you and they're pressing in on you." Jesus, everybody's touched you. Everybody wants something from you. But Jesus said, "Someone touched me, for I perceived that the power has gone out from me." I perceived that something just happened. In this moment, something special has happened. In the midst of this activity, Jesus is present in the moment. He's got this thing that he's heading off towards. So that's me. That's all I'm thinking about. If that was me, like, we got to get there fast. We got to make sure that this child is saved and this child's cared for. But in the midst of this, Jesus is still present in the moment with the crowd around him. And for Jesus, this woman would not be overlooked. Nothing would get between him and her. No distraction would find its way into that relationship. When the woman saw that she was not hidden, she came trembling and fell down before him and declared in the presence of all the people why she had touched him and how she had been immediately healed. And Jesus said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace." He calls her daughter. Essentially, he looks at her and says, "You're not a distraction. You're a daughter. You're not a problem. You're a priority. This relationship, it matters to me. I don't just want you to sneak in and out. I don't want this all to be a distraction to who you are and who I am and who we are together. You're not a distraction. You're a daughter." And what I love about Jesus is in the midst of the most important things that are happening around him, distractions don't get in and take him out of the moment. And here's what I want to ask you to do. Is that when you are in those moments, be in the moment. Perceive what God is doing in the midst of that moment. It's more than a ball and a glove. It's more than a dinner time. It's more than a one-on-one conversation with a coworker. It's more than a coffee. Be in that moment and perceive what God is doing in the midst of that, and then lean into it. Don't let it go by. Stop what's happening and point it out, and stop multitasking. I know some of you think you are multitasking geniuses, that you can do everything all at once. Can I tell you that you're the only one who thinks that in your life? All the other relationships that you're a part of, they know you're not a multitasking genius. You cannot multitask a relationship into success. You cannot multitask a relationship into success. When you're with your people, be with your people. Amen? When you're with your people, be 100% there, be with your people. Turn from the temptation to look at your phone. Turn from the temptation to think of other people. Turn from the temptation to rethink that project that is coming in the next few days at work. Rethink being tempted by debating and defending the critics in your head when the person who loves you is sitting right next to you. When you're with your people, be with your people. Look them in the eyes and be there, and never trade them for something lesser. Satan will always distract you and grow your appetite for something less to distract you from what's best.